The crystal chandelier above our heads cost more than most people's cars, but all I could focus on was my sister Victoria's perfectly manicured finger, pointing at me like I was something she'd found stuck to her Louboutin heel. "Maya, seriously, when are you going to grow up?" Victoria's voice carried that particular tone she'd perfected over the years, part pity, part disgust, with just enough concern to make her sound like the caring older sister, instead of the judgmental perfectionist she actually was. "You're 32 years old, living in that tiny studio apartment, playing building superintendent like you're still in college." I took a slow sip of my wine, a 2015 Chateau Margaux that cost more than Victoria spent on her monthly Equinox membership, and watched the faces around my parents' dining table. 12 family members, all nodding along like Victoria was delivering some profound truth instead of her usual condescending lecture. Before I tell you what happened next, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell, because this family drama revelation is going to blow your mind, and you won't want to miss the shocking twists coming up. "I mean, look at this place," Victoria continued, gesturing around our parents' Park Avenue penthouse with its imported Italian marble and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. "This is what success looks like, not some cramped studio where you can touch all four walls from the center of the room." What Victoria didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I owned not just my apartment, but the entire 47-unit luxury building it was in. A building worth $23 million, and that was just one of 4 properties in my portfolio. But I'm getting ahead of myself. "Victoria's right," chimed in Aunt Susan, dabbing at her lips with a cloth napkin that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. "At your age, you should own something, build equity. Think about your future." I almost laughed. If only she knew that my future was already secured by a real estate portfolio worth $67 million and growing. "Maya, sweetheart," my mother, Dr. Helen Chen, said in that gentle voice she used when delivering bad news to patients, "we're just worried about you. Your sister has her MBA from Harvard. She's a VP at Goldman Sachs. She's engaged to a successful corporate lawyer. She owns that beautiful condo on the Upper East Side." $2.8 million, Victoria added, unable to resist quantifying her success. "And it's appreciated 12% since I bought it." I nodded politely. My building had appreciated 18% in the same period, but who was counting? "What we're trying to say," my father, Federal Judge Robert Chen, said with the same measured tone he used in his courtroom, "is that it's time to think seriously about your career, about your life. You can't spend forever fixing broken pipes and collecting rent checks." The irony was so thick, I could have cut it with the sterling silver knife beside my plate. If they only knew that those rent checks I collected amounted to $3.8 million annually. "I appreciate everyone's concern," I said quietly, setting down my wineglass with deliberate care. Around the table, I could see my cousins, aunts, and uncles preparing for another round of the Fix Maya conversation that had become a holiday tradition. "But I'm quite comfortable where I am." Victoria snorted, like I'd told a particularly amusing joke. "Comfortable? Maya, you live in a 400-square-foot studio apartment on the Upper West Side. You drive a 12-year-old Honda Civic. Your biggest purchase this year was probably a new toolbox." She wasn't wrong about the Honda. I'd kept it specifically because it was invisible, unremarkable. Just like I'd cultivated an image of being the family disappointment while building an empire they never bothered to notice. "At least she has a job," offered Cousin Jennifer with false cheer. "Even if it's just maintenance work." "That's not a career," Uncle David interjected. He owned a mid-sized accounting firm and never missed an opportunity to remind everyone. "That's a series of odd jobs. Maya, I could get you something entry-level at my firm, proper benefits, retirement planning, room for advancement. I looked around the table at their expectant faces. These people had watched me struggle for over a decade, offering advice, connections, and barely concealed pity. They'd celebrated Victoria's every achievement while treating mine as quaint hobbies or dead-end pursuits. What they didn't know was that while Victoria was climbing the corporate ladder, I was buying the buildings the ladders were leaning against. "That's very generous, Uncle David," I said. "But I actually do own something, several somethings in fact." The table fell silent for about 3 seconds before Victoria burst into laughter. "What, your super supplies? Maya, honey, owning a wrench set doesn't count as real estate investment." Even my usually diplomatic mother couldn't suppress a small smile. "Maya, we know you work hard, but I own the building," I said quietly. The laughter continued for another moment before gradually dying as my words sank in. "What building?" Victoria asked, still chuckling, but with less certainty now. "The building where I live, 847 West End Avenue. All 47 units." The silence stretched longer this time. I could hear the soft jazz playing from the hidden speakers, the distant sound of traffic 23 floors below, the subtle clink of crystal as someone set down their glass with shaking hands. "Maya," my father said carefully, "are you feeling all right?" I reached into my purse, a deliberately modest Kate Spade bag I'd bought specifically because Victoria had once dismissed the brand as trying too hard, and pulled out a folder of documents I'd brought for exactly this moment. "Property deed," I said, sliding the first document across the table. "Purchased in 2019 for $12.3 million. Current valuation, $23 million. Victoria's manicured fingers fumbled as she picked up the paper. Her eyes scanned the legal text, and I watched her face change from amusement to confusion to something approaching panic. This can't be real," she whispered. "It's real," I said. "Would you like to see the others?" "Others?" my mother echoed faintly. I laid out 3 more property deeds like I was dealing cards. Brooklyn Heights Brownstone, purchased 2017. Tribeca Loft Building, purchased 2020. And my latest acquisition, a warehouse conversion in Dumbo, I closed on last month. The room had gone completely silent except for the rustling of papers as the documents made their way around the table. I watched my family's faces as they processed what they were seeing. Legal documents don't lie, and my father's trained eye would catch any forgery in seconds. "The combined value," I continued conversationally, "is approximately $67 million. Annual rental income runs about $3.8 million, though that varies depending on market conditions and occupancy rates." Victoria's phone was in her hands now, fingers flying across the screen. I knew what she was doing, the same thing I would do in her position. Checking property records, searching for Chen Holdings LLC, trying to verify what seemed impossible. "Oh my God," she breathed, staring at her screen. "Oh my God, it's all here. It's all real." Uncle David had gone pale. Aunt Susan looked like she was trying to solve a complex mathematical equation in her head. My mother had picked up one of the deeds and was reading it with the same meticulous attention she applied to medical charts. "Maya," my father said slowly, how did you?" 10 years, I said. "Started with a small inheritance from Grandma Chen. You remember? The one you all said I'd waste on art supplies and pipe dreams. Bought a duplex in Brooklyn for $180. Fixed it up, rented it out, used the income and equity to buy the next property, and so on." I took another sip of wine, savoring both the vintage and the moment. "Turns out I have a knack for real estate investment. Who knew?" Victoria was still staring at her phone screen like it might change if she looked hard enough. This says, this says you're the sole owner of Chen Holdings LLC. Property management for over 100 units across 4 buildings. 127 units, actually, I corrected gently. I just closed on 3 more in the Dumbo conversion. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, but I wasn't going to be the one to break it. I'd been uncomfortable at family gatherings for years, sitting through lectures about my wasted potential and lack of ambition, while they celebrated Victoria's corporate salary that represented about 4% of my annual income. Finally, Aunt Susan found her voice. But you live in that tiny studio? You dress like someone who fixes toilets and changes light bulbs? I suggested helpfully. That's because I do fix toilets and change light bulbs. I manage my own properties. I know every pipe, every electrical outlet, every potential problem before it becomes expensive. It's called being hands-on. But why didn't you tell us? My mother asked, and for the first time in years, I heard genuine emotion in her voice instead of polite concern. I considered the question seriously. Why hadn't I told them? There were practical reasons. Wealthy relatives suddenly become popular relatives, and I'd seen enough family dynamics shift around money to be cautious. But the real reason was simpler and more painful. Because you never asked, I said quietly. You asked Victoria about her job, her salary, her achievements. You asked me when I was going to get serious about my life. But you never asked what I was actually doing with my time, or why I seemed content with my choices, or whether I might know something you didn't. Victoria was scrolling through what looked like property management websites now, her face growing paler with each swipe. Maya, you're rich? I supplied. Successful? Financially stable? Yes, to all of the above. I stood up, smoothing down my simple black sweater, Uniqlo, deliberately chosen because Victoria had once described the brand as acceptable for people who can't afford real fashion. I should go, I said. Early morning tomorrow, contractor meeting for the Dumbo renovation. Maya, wait, my father said, half rising from his seat. We need to talk about this, about everything. I paused at the door to the dining room, looking back at my family, really looking at them. Victoria still clutching her phone like a lifeline. My parents, looking older and more confused than I'd ever seen them. My extended family, probably recalculating every interaction we'd had over the past decade. We can talk, I said. But first, you might want to think about what you want to say, because Maya needs to grow up and get a real job is off the table now. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. Behind me, I could hear the explosion of voices as my family finally found their tongues again. Questions, exclamations, probably a few recriminations about how they could have missed something so significant. As the elevator doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of Victoria frantically typing into her phone, probably texting her corporate lawyer fiancé about her suddenly very wealthy little sister. But let me take you back to where this all started, because understanding how I got here makes what happened next so much sweeter. Growing up in the Chen household was like living in a performance where the roles were assigned before birth and changing your part wasn't an option. Victoria was the star, brilliant, driven, destined for greatness. I was the supporting character, there to make her shine brighter by comparison. It started early. Victoria walking at 10 months, me at 14 months. Victoria's first words were, Mama and Dada. Mine were apparently unintelligible babbling until I was nearly 2. By the time we were in elementary school, the pattern was set. Victoria brought home perfect report cards and academic achievement awards. I brought home art projects that got polite smiles and quick trips to the refrigerator door before being forgotten. Maya's more creative, my mother would say to other parents at school events. The pause before creative, doing all the heavy lifting. It was code for not as smart, and everyone understood it, including me. Victoria got into Stuyvesant High School on her first try. I went to the local public school, where I was actually happy, but no one asked about that. Victoria got early admission to Harvard. I applied to art schools that my parents researched just enough to discuss their low employment rates and lack of practical career paths. The scholarships Victoria received made headlines in our family, literally. My mother kept a scrapbook of Victoria's achievements, complete with newspaper clippings from the local paper about local teen awarded full ride to Harvard. When I got a partial scholarship to Parsons, it was mentioned once at dinner and then forgotten. By the time Victoria graduated summa cum laude with her MBA and landed her first job at Goldman Sachs, I'd dropped out of art school and was working at a coffee shop in Brooklyn while figuring out what came next. The contrast couldn't have been more perfect from my family's perspective. Victoria's starting at Goldman with a base salary of $120 plus bonuses, my father announced at Christmas dinner when I was 23. They're putting her in the mergers and acquisitions division. Fast track to VP if she keeps performing. I was making $8.50 an hour plus tips at the time, so the numbers felt impossibly large. What I didn't mention was that I'd just used my grandmother's inheritance, $22,000 that everyone assumed I'd waste, as a down payment on a rundown duplex in Brooklyn Heights. That's wonderful, I said, and meant it. I was genuinely happy for Victoria, even as I calculated mortgage payments and renovation costs in my head. Maya's still figuring things out, my mother said with that same gentle voice she'd used to discuss a patient's terminal diagnosis. She's got time. Time. That became their favorite word for my situation. Maya has time. Maya's still young. Maya will find her way eventually. As if I was wandering around lost instead of systematically building something they couldn't see. The family WhatsApp group chat became a daily reminder of our different statuses. Photos of Victoria's Goldman Sachs office with its Manhattan skyline view. Updates about her latest client dinner at Per Se or Le Bernardin. Screenshots of business class boarding passes for company trips to London, Hong Kong, Dubai. My contributions were occasional photos of whatever neighborhood I was exploring, usually with the caption, "Nice day for a walk." What I didn't mention was that these walks were property scouting trips, checking out potential investments and getting to know different areas of the city. When Victoria got promoted to VP at 28, the family dinner conversation lasted 45 minutes. Her new salary, $180 base plus bonuses, was discussed in detail, along with her stock options and the prestige of being one of the youngest VPs in her division. When I bought my second property that same year, a brownstone I got for below market value because it needed extensive work, I mentioned it casually over dessert. "You bought a house?" my mother asked, confused. "How can you afford a house?" "It's an investment property," I explained. "I'm fixing it up to rent out." "Oh," my father said, the disappointment clear in his voice. "So you're becoming a landlord." The way he said landlord made it sound like I'd announced my intention to become a professional gambler or street performer. In his world, our world, you were either a professional with a proper career or you were something else, something lesser. "It's a smart investment," I said mildly. Real estate in Brooklyn Heights has been appreciating steadily. The rental income will cover the mortgage and renovation costs, and in a few years, I'll have built substantial equity. Victoria looked up from her phone, where she'd been showing Uncle David photos from her latest business trip. "Maya, real estate investment is incredibly risky without proper financial backing. What if you can't find tenants? What if property values drop? You could lose everything." "I could," I agreed. "But I've done my research. The fundamentals are solid." "Research?" Aunt Susan repeated with a knowing look at my mother. Maya, honey, investment firms spend millions on market research. They have teams of analysts with advanced degrees. You can't just read a few articles online and think you understand real estate markets. I nodded politely and didn't mention the 3 months I'd spent analyzing comparable sales, rental rates, demographic trends, and development plans for the Brooklyn waterfront. Or the relationships I'd built with contractors, property managers, and local real estate agents. In their minds, my lack of formal credentials meant my analysis was worthless. The pattern continued for years. Victoria's achievements were celebrated, analyzed, and proudly shared with anyone who would listen. My property acquisitions were met with polite concern and gentle suggestions that I should consider more stable career options. When Victoria bought her Upper East Side condo for $2.8 million, the entire family took a tour. They admired the marble countertops, the hardwood floors, the river views. My mother posted photos on Facebook with captions about her successful daughter's beautiful new home. When I closed on my third property, the Tribeca building that would prove to be my best investment, I mentioned it briefly at Victoria's engagement party. Another rental property? My father asked with barely concealed exasperation. Maya, when are you going to focus on building a real career instead of these side projects? Side projects. That's what he called a portfolio that was generating more annual income than Victoria's Goldman Sachs salary. But the real breaking point came 6 months ago, at Cousin Jennifer's wedding. I was seated at the family table, wearing a simple dress I'd bought off the rack at Nordstrom Rack, not because I couldn't afford better, but because I'd learned that expensive clothes just generated more uncomfortable questions about my finances. Victoria, resplendent in a custom Vera Wang dress and carrying a Hermes bag that cost more than most people's monthly rent, was holding court with stories from her latest deal. A major merger she'd helped structure, the client dinner at 11 Madison Park, the bonus that would pay for her and her fiancé's honeymoon in the Maldives. And what about you, Maya? Asked family friend Mrs. Patterson, the kind of society matron who collected gossip like other people collected stamps. What have you been up to? Oh, Maya's still doing her building maintenance thing, Victoria answered before I could speak. Playing with her little rental properties. It's sweet, really, like a hobby that pays. The table laughed, not mean-spirited laughter, but the indulgent chuckling you'd give a child who insisted they were going to be a princess when they grew up. Harmless delusions from someone who hadn't quite figured out how the real world worked. I smiled and nodded and let them think what they wanted to think. But sitting there, listening to Victoria dismiss my hobby to a table full of people who would probably be very interested to know exactly how profitable that hobby had become, I made a decision. I was tired of being the family disappointment. Tired of watching Victoria collect praise for achievements that represented a fraction of what I'd built. Tired of being treated like the cautionary tale at family gatherings. Most of all, I was tired of protecting other people's feelings by hiding my success. The next family gathering would be Thanksgiving at my parents' penthouse. Victoria would undoubtedly have new achievements to celebrate. New ways to demonstrate how much more successful she was than her little sister. And for the first time in 10 years, I was going to let her. Right up until the moment I didn't. Little did they know, their latest family intervention would be the catalyst for the most satisfying revelation of my life. The thing about family traditions is that they become comfortable in their predictability, even when that comfort comes at someone's expense. Every major holiday in the Chen family followed the same script. Gather at my parents' penthouse, admire Victoria's latest achievements, and spend at least 20 minutes discussing Maya's wasted potential. This Thanksgiving promised to be a particularly robust performance. Victoria had just closed a major deal, something involving a tech startup acquisition that I only half listened to because I was calculating the square footage of the Dumbo warehouse I was about to purchase. Her bonus alone would be more than most people made in 2 years, and everyone was appropriately impressed. I arrived deliberately late, knowing that punctuality would only extend the amount of time I'd have to spend nodding along to conversations about my life choices. The doorman, James, smiled as he announced my arrival to the penthouse. "Ms. Maya, haven't seen you in a while. How's that building of yours coming along?" I paused, struck by the casual way he referred to my building. James had worked in my parents' building for 15 years. He knew everyone, saw everything, and unlike my family, he paid attention to details that mattered. "Very well, thank you for asking," I said, genuinely touched that he'd remembered. "The renovations are almost finished." "That's wonderful. Real estate's a good business if you know what you're doing. My nephew's trying to get into property management himself." I made a mental note to give James my business card before I left. His nephew might be exactly the kind of person I needed for my expanding operation. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor gave me time to prepare mentally for what was coming. I'd brought the property documents with me, not because I'd planned some dramatic revelation, but because I'd been carrying them around since signing the papers on the Dumbo warehouse. Sometimes the universe provides perfect timing. The penthouse was full when I arrived. Not just my parents and Victoria, but the entire extended family contingent, Uncle David and Aunt Susan, Cousin Jennifer and her new husband Mike, my grandparents, even Great-Aunt Dorothy, who usually spent holidays complaining about her arthritis and young people's work ethics. "Maya," my mother called from the kitchen, where she was directing the caterers with military precision. "You're just in time. We were about to sit down." Victoria appeared at my elbow immediately, looking radiant in what I recognized as a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's wedding gowns. Her engagement ring caught the light from the chandelier as she gestured, a 3-carat situation that her fiancé had probably spent months saving for. "Maya, you have to hear about the Morrison deal," she said, already launching into the story without waiting for my response. 18 months of negotiations, 7 different regulatory approvals, and a final closing value of $2.4 billion. My team structured the entire financing package. "That's impressive," I said, and meant it. Victoria was genuinely good at her job, even if her success had come at the cost of developing any perspective about other people's achievements. "The bonus alone is going to be incredible," she continued as we moved toward the dining room. "Jason and I are thinking about upgrading to a bigger place. Maybe something with a doorman building, you know? Really establish ourselves." I nodded politely and took my usual seat at the far end of the table, the spot that had somehow been designated as mine over the years. Close enough to be included in conversations, far enough away to be easily ignored when more important family business was being discussed. Dinner conversation flowed predictably. Victoria's deal dominated the first course, with detailed explanations of market conditions and regulatory challenges that had everyone nodding sagely. Uncle David shared updates from his accounting firm, growth, new clients, plans for expansion. Cousin Jennifer talked about her new job at a marketing agency, complete with salary details that would have impressed me more if I hadn't been mentally calculating the monthly rental income from just one of my buildings. I contributed appropriately, asking questions and making supportive comments while working my way through the catered meal. The food was excellent. My mother had impeccable taste and the budget to indulge it, but I found myself distracted by the view from the dining room windows. From the 23rd floor, you could see across Central Park to the buildings lining the Upper West Side. Somewhere in that vista was my building, my tenants, my carefully constructed empire that no one at this table knew existed. The disconnect between what they saw when they looked at me and what I actually was had never felt more surreal. "Maya, sweetheart," my mother said as the caterers cleared the main course. "We wanted to talk to you about something." "Here it comes," I thought, recognizing the tone. This was the voice my mother used for serious conversations about my future, my choices, my need to think practically about my life. "We've all been talking," my father added, settling into his authoritative mode. "And we're concerned about your situation." Victoria leaned forward, her expression appropriately serious. "Maya, you're 32 years old. Most people your age are thinking about mortgages, retirement planning, building equity. You're still living like you're in college." "Your apartment is what, 400 square feet?" Aunt Susan chimed in. "And you're paying Manhattan rent for basically a closet." $3,200 a month," Uncle David added with the precision of someone who dealt with numbers professionally. "That's $38,400 annually. Money you're never going to see again." I took a sip of wine and said nothing, curious to see how far they'd take this intervention. "We know you work hard," my mother continued diplomatically. "The building maintenance, the repair work, managing those rental properties. But Maya, those are jobs, not a career. There's no advancement potential, no benefits, no security." "And let's be honest," Victoria said, with what she probably thought was gentle concern. "How long can you keep doing physical labor? What happens when you're 50 and your knees give out from climbing stairs all day?" The table murmured agreement. 12 people, all nodding along with the assessment of my doomed future as a manual laborer with no prospects and no assets. "We have a proposal," my father said, reaching the crescendo of what was clearly a planned presentation. "Uncle David has offered you a position at his firm. Entry level, but with full benefits and room for advancement. You could start after the holidays." Uncle David nodded enthusiastically. "Administrative work to start, but Maya, you're smart. You could learn the business, maybe take some evening classes in accounting or business management, build real professional credentials." "And," my mother added with a smile, "you could move back home temporarily. Save money, get on your feet financially. The guest room is always available." I looked around the table at their expectant faces. They were genuinely trying to help, I realized. In their minds, they were staging an intervention for a family member who was struggling and too proud to admit it. They'd probably spent weeks planning this conversation, coordinating the job offer, working out the details of their rescue plan. The generosity of their intentions made what I was about to do feel almost cruel. "That's very thoughtful," I said carefully, "but I'm actually quite comfortable with my current situation." Victoria's laugh was immediate and involuntary. "Maya, comfortable? You're living in a studio apartment and fixing broken toilets for a living. That's not comfortable. That's survival." "You don't own anything," Aunt Susan added with motherly concern. "No property, no investments, no assets. What if something happens? What if you get sick or injured?" "Maya," my grandmother spoke up for the first time, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd lived through the Depression and World War II. "I know you think you're independent, but independence without security is just foolishness. You need to think about your future." The intervention was gaining momentum now, with everyone contributing their perspective on my precarious situation. Cousin Jennifer mentioned the importance of networking and professional development. Great Aunt Dorothy shared a cautionary tale about someone she'd known who'd refused family help and ended up destitute in old age. Through it all, I sat quietly, occasionally nodding or murmuring agreement, while mentally calculating the combined value of my assets versus everyone else's at the table. It wasn't even close. "The point is," Victoria said, clearly positioning herself as the voice of reason, "you don't have to struggle anymore. We're family. We want to help you build something real, something lasting. But Maya, you have to want to help yourself too." "Something real," I repeated slowly. "Something lasting." "Exactly," my father said, relief evident in his voice that I was finally seeing reason. Property ownership, equity building, career advancement, the things that create genuine financial security. I reached for my purse and withdrew the folder I'd been carrying around for weeks. The property documents felt substantial in my hands, heavy with official seals and legal language that would change everything they thought they knew about my life. "You're absolutely right," I said, opening the folder. "Property ownership is important. Building equity, creating financial security." I pulled out the first document and set it gently on the table. "Which is why I bought this building 3 years ago." The conversation didn't stop immediately. Victoria was still mid-sentence about the importance of professional networking when the words sank in. Uncle David was reaching for his wine glass when he paused, his hand frozen halfway to the stem. "What building?" my mother asked carefully. 847 West End Avenue, I said, sliding the property deed across the polished table. 47 units, current market value approximately $23 million. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the soft hum of the building's HVAC system. 12 people staring at a legal document that fundamentally challenged everything they thought they knew about the family disappointment. Victoria's hands were shaking slightly as she picked up the deed. Her eyes scanned the legal text, looking for some explanation that would make sense of what she was seeing. "This can't be right," she said finally. "Maya, this says you own an entire apartment building." "I do," I confirmed, pulling out the second document. "Along with this brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, which I purchased in 2017. Another deed joined the first on the table, then a third, then a fourth. The combined portfolio," I said conversationally, "is valued at approximately $67 million. Annual rental income runs about $3.8 million, though that varies with market conditions and occupancy rates." What they didn't know was that while they were building their careers, I was building an empire, one they'd never bothered to notice. The story of how I built my real estate empire starts with a 22-year-old art school dropout sitting in a lawyer's office, trying not to cry while listening to the reading of my grandmother's will. Grandma Chen had been the one person in my family who never made me feel like a disappointment. While everyone else worried about my unconventional choices, she would ask about my sketches, my photography, my plans for the future that didn't involve corporate ladders or professional networking events. "Maya gets it," she used to say when family conversations turned to career planning and practical considerations. "She sees things differently. That's not a problem to be fixed." When she passed away suddenly my senior year, I was devastated. When I learned she'd left me $22,000, her entire savings account, I was overwhelmed. The rest of the family received sentimental items, jewelry, photographs, her collection of Chinese porcelain. I got the money because, according to the letter she'd left with her lawyer, "Maya will know what to do with it." Everyone assumed I'd spend it on art supplies, travel, or whatever other frivolous pursuits they imagined occupied my time. Instead, I spent 3 months walking through Brooklyn neighborhoods, learning about property values, rental markets, and the kind of houses that could be transformed with hard work and smart investment. The duplex I found in Brooklyn Heights was a disaster. Water damage, outdated electrical, a kitchen that belonged in a museum exhibit about 1960s home design. The seller was motivated, a divorce situation where both parties just wanted to be done with the property, and I got it for $180,000, about 30% below market value for the neighborhood. I moved into the smaller unit and spent every free moment working on renovations. YouTube became my university, teaching me everything from basic plumbing to hardwood floor installation. I hired professionals for the major electrical and structural work, but everything else I learned to do myself. The financial strategy was simple: live in one unit while fixing up the other, then rent out the renovated space for enough to cover the mortgage payment and building equity. Within 18 months, I was generating positive cash flow and had gained enough experience to tackle a bigger project. Property number 2 was a brownstone that had been chopped up into illegal boarding rooms. The owner had gotten tired of dealing with building violations and was eager to sell to someone willing to restore it properly. I used the equity from the Brooklyn Heights duplex as a down payment and spent 8 months converting 4 cramped rooms back into 2 beautiful apartments. By the time I was 26, I owned 2 buildings, managed 4 rental units, and was generating enough income to qualify for a commercial loan. More importantly, I developed systems for property management that could scale. Reliable contractors, efficient tenant screening, proactive maintenance schedules that prevented small problems from becoming expensive disasters. The business grew organically from there. Each property generated income that could be leveraged for the next acquisition. Each renovation taught me something new about maximizing value and minimizing costs. Each year, my portfolio became more valuable and my expertise more refined. The Tribeca building was my first major acquisition, a 6-story former warehouse that I converted into 12 luxury lofts. The purchase price was $2 million, financed through a combination of leveraged equity from my existing properties and a commercial development loan. The renovation took 14 months and cost another $8 million, but the finished units rented for an average of $4,500 per month. That project established my reputation in the commercial real estate community. Suddenly, brokers were calling me with off-market opportunities. Property managers were referring potential deals they thought I might be interested in. I'd accidentally built a network of industry professionals who saw me as a serious player, not a hobbyist with a couple of rental properties. The West End Avenue building, the one where I maintained my small studio apartment, was the crown jewel of my portfolio. A pre-war building with incredible bones but decades of deferred maintenance, it came on the market when the previous owner's estate was settled. 47 units, everything from studios to 3-bedroom apartments, in one of Manhattan's most desirable neighborhoods. The asking price was $18 million. I got it for $12. $3 million because I could close quickly, had proof of funds, and was willing to take on the extensive capital improvements the building needed. Over the next 2 years, I invested another $2 million in renovations. New elevator systems, updated electrical throughout, restored original hardwood floors, renovated kitchens and bathrooms in half the units. The finished product was spectacular. A luxury building with classic pre-war charm and modern amenities, commanding premium rents in a neighborhood where demand always exceeded supply. Current valuation, $23 million and rising. But here's what made the whole empire possible. I lived like I was broke. While Victoria was spending her Goldman Sachs salary on designer clothes, expensive restaurants, and luxury vacations, I was driving my 12-year-old Honda and buying clothes at Target. Every dollar I didn't spend on lifestyle inflation was a dollar I could invest in the next property acquisition. I maintained my studio apartment in the West End Avenue building, not because I couldn't afford better, but because it was perfect camouflage. Anyone who visited would see exactly what my family saw: a small, modest space that looked like the home of someone scraping by as a building superintendent. What they didn't see was the penthouse I'd created by combining 3 units on the top floor. 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a chef's kitchen, and a private terrace with views of the Hudson River. My actual living space, accessible through a separate entrance that I used when I wanted privacy. The superintendent's apartment was just my public face. The business structure was equally invisible. Chen Holdings LLC owned all the properties, managed through a separate property management company that I'd established as My Holdings Grew. On paper, Maya Chen was an employee of both companies. The building superintendent who lived in a studio apartment, and collected a modest salary for maintenance work. In reality, Maya Chen was the sole owner of a real estate empire worth more than the combined assets of everyone at that Thanksgiving table. The secrecy wasn't just about avoiding awkward family dynamics, though that was part of it. Wealth changes relationships in complicated ways, and I'd seen enough family friends navigate sudden money to know that transparency could create as many problems as it solved. But the deeper reason was simpler. I was tired of being underestimated, and anonymity was powerful. When contractors quoted prices for renovation work, they gave me their best rates because they saw a hands-on owner who understood the work being done. When brokers brought me deals, they were honest about problems and opportunities because they knew I wasn't some trust fund kid playing with daddy's money. Most importantly, I'd built something entirely my own. Every property acquisition, every renovation decision, every tenant screening, every maintenance call, it was all me. No family connections, no inherited advantages, no corporate infrastructure. Just careful planning, calculated risks, and an enormous amount of hard work. By the time I was 32, my net worth exceeded $50 million. My annual income from rental properties was more than most senior executives earned in their corporate careers. I had enough passive income to retire comfortably, but I loved the work too much to stop. And through it all, my family saw exactly what I let them see. Maya, the building superintendent, struggling to make ends meet in her tiny apartment, wasting her potential on manual labor and hobby investments. Until that Thanksgiving dinner, when I decided that 10 years of being underestimated was enough. After years of watching my family dismiss my success, it was time to show them exactly who they'd been underestimating. The beautiful thing about truth is that once it starts coming out, it's almost impossible to stop. Like water finding cracks in a dam, each revelation created space for the next one until the whole carefully constructed narrative of my life came flooding out. Victoria was still staring at the first property deed when I placed the second one beside it. Brooklyn Heights brownstone, purchased 2017 for $680,000. Current value $4 million. Her manicured fingers traced the legal text like she was reading hieroglyphics. Maya, my father said in his courtroom voice, the one he used when he needed to establish facts before proceeding with complex legal arguments. These documents appear to be legitimate property deeds with your name as the sole owner. They are legitimate, I confirmed, adding the third deed to the growing pile. Tribeca warehouse conversion, purchased 2020 for $4. $2 million, renovated for an additional $1. $8 million, current valuation $87 million. Uncle David had gone completely pale. As an accountant, he understood exactly what he was looking at. Asset documentation for a portfolio that represented more wealth than his entire client base combined. But how? Aunt Susan started, then trailed off as I placed the fourth and final deed on the table. Dumbo Warehouse, purchased last month for $12. $3 million. 23 units, currently under renovation for conversion to luxury lofts. Projected completion early next year. Estimated value upon completion, $5 million. I sat back in my chair and watched 12 faces try to process what they were seeing. The math was simple enough. 4 properties, combined value approaching $52 million. Owned outright by the family member they'd been staging an intervention for 20 minutes earlier. Victoria's phone was in her hands now, fingers flying across the screen with desperate urgency. I'm looking up Chen Holdings LLC, she announced to the table, as if she was conducting an investigation for everyone's benefit. Good idea, I said mildly. You'll find it registered in New York State as a limited liability company, established 2018, with Maya Chen as the sole member and managing director. Property management for, Victoria's voice faltered as she read from her screen. 127 residential units across 4 buildings in Brooklyn Heights, Tribeca, Upper West Side, and Dumbo. That's correct, I said. Though the Dumbo units aren't online yet, still working through the final renovation phase. Cousin Jennifer was frantically typing into her own phone now. Maya, this says your company has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. Tenant reviews average 4.8 stars. There are articles about your Brooklyn Heights renovation in, oh my God, in Architectural Digest. I nodded. The Architectural Digest feature had been unexpected. A freelance writer had noticed the transformation of the brownstone and pitched it as a story about young entrepreneurs revitalizing historic properties. The photos were beautiful, though they'd been careful not to include any shots that would identify me personally. Annual revenue, Uncle David read from what looked like a commercial real estate database, approximately $8 million, net operating income. He paused, double-checking the numbers. Net operating income, $4 million annually. The silence that followed was different from the earlier confused quiet. This was the silence of people recalculating everything they thought they knew about someone, trying to reconcile a decade of assumptions with documentation that couldn't be argued with. My mother set down her wineglass with careful precision. Maya, sweetheart, I need to understand something. If you own all these properties, if you're generating this kind of income, why are you living in that tiny studio apartment? I'm not, I said simply. Another pause, another recalculation. What do you mean, you're not? Victoria asked, though her voice suggested she was afraid of the answer. The studio apartment is my office, where I meet with tenants, handle building business, store supplies and equipment. I live in the penthouse. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo gallery, scrolling to the pictures I'd taken after finishing the penthouse renovation. 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, chef's kitchen with granite countertops and top-of-the-line appliances, living room with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a private terrace overlooking the Hudson River. Custom renovation, I explained as I passed the phone around the table. Combined 3 separate units into one space, about 2,000 square feet, plus the terrace. Great-Aunt Dorothy held the phone at arm's length, squinting at the photos through her reading glasses. This is your apartment? This is where you live? This is where I live, I confirmed. The studio is just where I work. Victoria was scrolling through property management websites now, cross-referencing everything she could find about my company. Maya, there are industry awards here. Rising Star in Commercial Real Estate, Excellence in Historic Property Renovation, Best New Property Management Company. The Historic Renovation Award was for the Brooklyn Heights brownstone, I said. The Property Management Award was last year, after we hit 98% occupancy across all buildings. My father was studying the property deeds with his lawyer's eye for detail. Maya, these purchase dates span nearly 10 years. You've been building this portfolio since you were in your early 20s. Since I was 22, I corrected. Started with Grandma Chen's inheritance. $22,000, my mother said faintly, remembering the amount from the will reading. $22,000 that everyone assumed I'd waste on art supplies, I said, not unkindly. I used it as a down payment on the Brooklyn Heights duplex instead. Uncle David was doing calculations on his phone now, probably trying to figure out how someone could leverage $22,000 into a $52 million portfolio in 10 years. Maya, the mathematics of this? You'd need to have averaged better than 30% annual returns to build this kind of wealth from that starting point. Real estate in gentrifying Brooklyn neighborhoods did average about 30% annual appreciation from 2012 to 2018, I said. And that's just property value increases, not counting rental income, tax advantages, and leverage from strategic refinancing. Strategic refinancing? Victoria repeated slowly, and I could see her trying to reconcile this language with the sister she thought she knew. Using accumulated equity as collateral for additional property acquisitions, I explained. Basic real estate investment strategy. Buy, improve, rent, refinance, repeat. Cousin Jennifer was still scrolling through articles about my company. Maya, there's a profile here in Real Estate Weekly about young entrepreneurs disrupting traditional property management. They interviewed you. Anonymous interview, I said. They agreed not to use my name or photo. I prefer to keep a low profile. Why? My mother asked, and for the first time all evening, her voice carried genuine curiosity instead of concern. I considered the question carefully. Around the table, 12 people were waiting for my answer, trying to understand not just what I'd built, but why I'd hidden it from them. Because I wanted to build something that was entirely mine, I said finally. No family connections, no inherited advantages, no questions about whether I'd earned what I had. And because... I paused, looking around at faces that were still processing the gap between perception and reality. Because you never asked? I said simply. For 10 years, you've asked Victoria about her salary, her promotions, her achievements. You've asked me when I was going to get serious about my life. But you never asked what I was actually doing with my time, or whether I might be more successful than I appeared. The truth of that statement settled over the table like a blanket. In the silence that followed, I could hear the soft clink of crystal as someone set down their wine glass, the distant sound of the elevator in the hallway, the muffled conversation from whatever party was happening on the floor below. Victoria was still staring at her phone screen, but she'd stopped scrolling. Maya, she said quietly, according to this, your net worth is approximately $52 million, I finished. Not counting liquid assets, investment accounts, or the business bank accounts, just property values. $52 million, Uncle David repeated, like he was testing how the words sounded. More than all of us combined, Aunt Susan added unnecessarily. I stood up from the table, smoothing down my simple black sweater, the same Uniqlo sweater that Victoria had once dismissed as acceptable for people who can't afford real fashion. I should go, I said. Early morning tomorrow. The Dumbo contractors want to walk through the electrical plans before they start the next phase. Maya, wait, my father said, half rising from his chair. We need to. There's so much we need to understand, to discuss. I paused at the dining room doorway, looking back at my family. Victoria was still clutching her phone like it might provide some explanation for how she'd missed something so enormous happening right under her nose. My parents looked older than I'd ever seen them, probably wondering how many other assumptions about their children's lives might be equally wrong. We can discuss it, I said. But maybe first you should think about what you want to say, because Maya needs to grow up and get a real job is off the table now. I walked toward the elevator, listening to the explosion of voices behind me as my family finally found their tongues again. Questions, exclamations, probably some arguments about how they could have missed something so significant happening in their own family. As I waited for the elevator, my phone buzzed with the first of what would be dozens of text messages over the next few days. Victoria, of course. Maya, we need to talk. Call me. But the revelations weren't over. I'd saved the best surprise for last. The first text message arrived at 6:47 a.m. the next morning. Victoria, naturally. Maya, I couldn't sleep. We need to talk. This changes everything. By noon, I had 37 unread messages in the family WhatsApp group that had been mostly silent except for Victoria's achievement updates for the past 2 years. Suddenly, everyone had urgent questions about my business, my plans, my investment strategy, my availability for coffee meetings to catch up properly. I was in the Dumbo warehouse, reviewing electrical plans with my contractor team, when my phone started ringing. Victoria's name on the caller ID, third call in an hour. I should take this, I told Jake, my head electrician. Family emergency. Jake grinned. The kind where they just found out you're rich? Word travels fast in the construction community, especially when you're managing multiple high-end renovation projects simultaneously. My crews had always known I was more than just another landlord dabbling in property management, but they'd respected my low-key approach and never asked uncomfortable questions about my background. Something like that, I said, stepping outside to take the call. Maya, thank God! Victoria's voice was strained, almost frantic. I've been trying to reach you all morning. We need to meet, today. Can you come to Manhattan? I'm working, Victoria. What's so urgent? What's urgent? Her voice pitched higher. Maya, you dropped a bombshell on our entire family last night. You own $50 million worth of real estate. You've been secretly running a business empire for 10 years. You think we can just go back to normal Sunday dinners after that? I walked to the edge of the construction site, looking out over the East River toward Manhattan. From this angle, I could see the tops of some of my buildings, including the West End Avenue property where this whole conversation had started. Victoria, what exactly do you want to discuss? A long pause. I want to understand how this happened, how you built all this without any of us knowing, how you... Maya, your annual income is more than mine and Jason's combined, and we both have advanced degrees and work at top-tier firms. There it was. The real issue wasn't that I'd hidden my success, it was that my success exceeded hers. And I want to apologize, she continued, her voice softer now. For last night, for all the things I've said over the years about your choices, your apartment, your career. I was wrong. I was so wrong. You were working with the information you had, I said diplomatically. No, Maya, I wasn't. I was working with assumptions I never bothered to question. When did you... How long have you been living in that penthouse? 3 years, since I finished the renovation. 3 years. She was quiet for a moment. 3 years of family dinners where we talked about your tiny studio apartment and your lack of assets. 3 years of me feeling sorry for you. I never asked you to feel sorry for me. But I did. We all did. And now? Another pause. Maya, do you know what Jason said when I told him about last night? Jason was Victoria's fiancé, the corporate lawyer who'd always been politely dismissive of my maintenance work at family gatherings. I'm sure you'll tell me. He said, your sister just proved she's the smartest person in your family, and none of you noticed. He's right, isn't he? I didn't answer immediately. Through the warehouse windows, I could see my construction crew working on the electrical installation for units that would rent for $4,000 a month once completed. In 6 months, this building would generate another $1 million in annual rental income. Victoria, what do you want from this conversation? I want us to start over, she said quickly. I want to understand your business, learn from you, maybe find ways we could work together. Maya, you're obviously brilliant at this. You could teach me... Stop, I said quietly. What? Just stop. Victoria, yesterday you thought I was a failure who needed saving. Today, you want to be business partners. Do you see the problem with that? Another long pause. I was wrong yesterday. Yes, you were. But that's not the point. The point is that your opinion of me changed the moment you realized I had money. Not because you got to know me better, not because you discovered hidden talents or different perspectives, just because you found out I was wealthy. That's not... It is exactly that. For 10 years, you've dismissed my choices because you thought they weren't financially successful. Now that you know they were more financially successful than your choices, suddenly, You want to learn from me? The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Victoria spoke, her voice small. So, what does that mean? For us, I mean. For our relationship. I looked back toward the warehouse, where Jake was gesturing at blueprints and probably wondering how long my family emergency was going to take. It means we start from here, I said. No more assumptions about each other's lives. No more interventions about career choices. No more treating family relationships like scorecards where we compare achievements. Okay, she said quickly. Yes, I can do that. And Victoria? I'm not looking for business partners. I built this company to be independent, and I intend to keep it that way. Another pause. I understand. Good. I have to get back to work now. Maya, wait. Will you? Can we still do family dinners? I know things are weird now, but I don't want this to ruin everything. I considered the question. 24 hours ago, family dinners meant sitting through lectures about my wasted potential, while Victoria collected praise for achievements that represented a fraction of what I'd built. But maybe things could be different now. We can try, I said. But Victoria, if you ever refer to my work as a hobby again, or suggest that I need career advice, or treat me like the family charity case, I'm done. With family dinners, with family events, with all of it. I won't, she said quickly. I promise. Maya, I really am sorry. I know you are. I'll talk to you later. I ended the call and walked back into the warehouse, where Jake was waiting with barely concealed amusement. Family emergency resolved? He asked. Getting there. What's the status on the electrical? We're ahead of schedule. Should have the first floor units wired by end of week. But Maya, I've got to ask. How long were you planning to keep the secret identity thing going? I laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd had since the previous evening. Honestly, I wasn't planning to reveal it at all, but sometimes the universe forces your hand. Well, for what it's worth, you've been the most hands-on owner I've ever worked with. Rich or not, you know your stuff. That afternoon, I had coffee with my parents at a small cafe near Columbia University, halfway between their penthouse and my Dumbo construction site. They looked nervous in a way I hadn't seen since I was a teenager, like they were afraid of saying the wrong thing and making an already complicated situation worse. Maya, my mother started carefully. Your father and I want you to know how proud we are of what you've accomplished. I stirred my coffee and waited for the but that was surely coming. But we're also confused about why you felt you couldn't share it with us, my father continued. We're your parents. We want to celebrate your successes, not judge them. Do you? I asked. Because for 10 years, you've been trying to fix my life. Every family gathering included at least one conversation about my need to get serious, think practically, build real security. You celebrated Victoria's corporate salary while treating my property investments like expensive hobbies. My mother winced. We didn't understand what you were building. Because you never asked. You saw building maintenance and rental properties and decided it wasn't serious work. You never asked about my business plan, my financial projections, my long-term strategy. You just assumed I was struggling and needed guidance. You're right, my father said quietly. We made assumptions based on appearances instead of asking questions about reality. I looked at these two successful, intelligent people who'd somehow missed the fact that their daughter had built a multi-million-dollar business right under their noses. Part of me wanted to stay angry, to make them understand how it felt to be underestimated by the people who were supposed to know you best. But another part of me was just tired of carrying the weight of their disappointment, even if that disappointment had been based on incomplete information. I love you both, I said finally. But I need you to understand that this isn't just about money or success. It's about respect. I need you to respect my choices, my expertise, my independence. Not because I'm wealthy, but because I'm your daughter, and I've earned it. My mother reached across the table and took my hand. We do respect you, Maya, and we're sorry it took a real estate portfolio for us to show it properly. That evening, I sat in my actual apartment, the penthouse with its river views and custom renovation, and scrolled through the dozens of messages that had accumulated throughout the day. Family members who wanted to schedule calls, distant relatives who'd suddenly remembered my existence, family friends who'd heard interesting news about my business ventures. But the message that made me smile came from James, the doorman at my parents' building. Ms. Maya, heard through the grapevine that your family finally figured out what you've been up to. About time. My nephew would still love to talk to you about property management when you have a chance. Sometimes the people who see you every day are the ones who actually see you. 6 months later, the dust had settled, but the lessons learned would last a lifetime. 6 months after what my family now refers to as the Thanksgiving revelation, I'm sitting in my penthouse office, reviewing financial projections for my latest acquisition, when Victoria calls. Not frantically, not desperately, but with the casual tone of someone calling her sister to catch up. Maya, I wanted to run something by you, she says. Jason and I are looking at apartments, and our broker mentioned a building in Tribeca that might be one of yours. The Merchants Quarter development? That's mine, I confirm, pulling up the property file on my computer. Why? Are you interested in renting or just curious? Renting, actually. Jason loves the neighborhood, and the building has incredible reviews. But I wanted to check with you first. Would it be weird if we were your tenants? I consider the question. 6 months ago, Victoria was telling me I needed to grow up and get a real job. Now she wants to rent an apartment from my company, knowing exactly who her landlord would be. It wouldn't be weird for me, I say. But Victoria, you'd be paying market rate rent to my property management company, just like any other tenant. No family discounts, no special treatment. Can you handle that? I'd be insulted if you offered special treatment, she says, and I can hear the smile in her voice. We want to rent from you because you run a good business, not because we're related. This conversation would have been impossible 6 months ago, but Victoria has made genuine changes in how she approaches our relationship. She asks about my projects with real interest, shares her own professional challenges without assuming I need her advice, and most importantly, she stopped treating my success as a personal affront to her worldview. The changes didn't happen overnight. There were awkward family dinners where everyone tiptoed around the elephant in the room, phone calls where Victoria would start to offer business advice before catching herself, moments where the old dynamics tried to reassert themselves. But gradually, we found our footing. Victoria learned to see me as a peer rather than a project. My parents learned to ask about my work instead of worrying about my future. Uncle David stopped offering me entry-level positions and started asking for real estate investment advice. The shift became complete last month when Victoria called me after getting laid off from Goldman Sachs during a round of corporate restructuring. Instead of the panicked, ego-bruised conversation I might have expected, she was remarkably philosophical. Maya, I've been thinking, she said. For years, I defined my worth by my job title and salary. But watching what you built, watching how you built it, made me realize that security doesn't come from corporate structures. It comes from owning something yourself. She's starting her own financial consulting firm now, focusing on high net worth individuals who need complex investment strategies. It's a risk, giving up the Goldman Sachs brand and steady salary for the uncertainty of entrepreneurship. But Victoria has discovered she likes the challenge of building something from scratch. I finally understand why you kept your success quiet, she told me last week. When people know you have money, they treat you differently. Not necessarily better, just differently. Sometimes I miss being able to walk into a room without people calculating my net worth. My own business has continued to grow. The Dumbo warehouse conversion finished ahead of schedule and under budget, with all 23 units rented before construction was complete. The Tribeca building continues to appreciate, helped by the neighborhood's ongoing development boom. I've started looking at properties in Queens and the Bronx, areas where gentrification is creating the same opportunities I found in Brooklyn 10 years ago. Last month, I established the Hidden Success Foundation, a nonprofit that provides microloans and business development support to young entrepreneurs from working-class backgrounds. The name is deliberately ironic, a nod to my own experience of building wealth while being overlooked by everyone around me. The foundation's first recipient was Marcus, a 24-year-old from the Bronx who'd been working as a building superintendent while developing a small property maintenance business on the side. His loan application reminded me of myself at his age, ambitious, hardworking, and completely invisible to traditional funding sources that prefer business plans from MBA graduates. "Ms. Chen," he said when I called to tell him his loan had been approved, "why are you doing this? I mean, what's in it for you?" "Someone gave me a chance once," I told him. "Now I'm passing it forward." That someone was my grandmother, of course, though she never could have imagined what I'd do with her $22,000 gift. Her investment in my potential returned more than anyone could have predicted, and now I'm in a position to make similar investments in other people's potential. The family dynamics have settled into something healthier than what we had before, though it took time to find the right balance. My parents no longer worry about my financial security, but they've replaced that concern with pride that's almost overwhelming in its intensity. They want to show me off at social events, introduce me to their friends as their incredibly successful daughter, include me in conversations about investment strategies and business opportunities. I've had to set boundaries there too. I don't want to be the family trophy any more than I wanted to be the family disappointment. I'm just Maya, building something I believe in, living a life that makes sense to me. The most surprising change has been in my relationship with money itself. For years, I accumulated wealth while living like I was broke, driven by some combination of financial prudence and emotional protection. But financial security isn't worth much if you never feel secure enough to enjoy it. So I've started making different choices. I bought a new car, nothing flashy, but something reliable that doesn't require constant mechanical attention. I upgraded my wardrobe beyond Target basics, though I still favor simple, quality pieces over designer labels. I travel more, take real vacations instead of working weekends. Most importantly, I've started saying yes to opportunities that interest me rather than just opportunities that generate income. I'm consulting on an affordable housing development project in Queens, serving on the board of a nonprofit that provides financial literacy education in underserved communities, speaking at real estate investment seminars for young professionals. Last week, I got an email from a journalist who's writing a book about young entrepreneurs who've built wealth outside traditional career paths. She'd found my story through public property records and business filings, and wanted to interview me about my approach to real estate investment. "I'd be happy to talk," I wrote back, "but I prefer to keep a low profile. Can we do this without using my name or photo?" Old habits die hard, but maybe it's time to be more visible, to let other people know that there are different ways to build success than the ones that get celebrated in business magazines and family dinner conversations. As I finish reviewing the financial projections for my latest property acquisition, a small apartment building in Astoria that reminds me of my first Brooklyn Heights duplex, I think about how much has changed since that Thanksgiving dinner 6 months ago. My net worth has grown to $89 million. My rental portfolio generates enough passive income to support whatever lifestyle I choose. I have more financial security than I ever imagined possible when I was that 22-year-old sitting in a lawyer's office, trying to figure out what to do with my grandmother's modest inheritance. But the real change isn't in my bank account. It's in my relationships with the people who matter most to me. Victoria and I talk regularly now, not because we have to as sisters, but because we enjoy each other's company. My parents ask about my work with genuine interest rather than polite concern. Uncle David refers potential clients to me instead of offering me entry-level jobs. Most importantly, I've learned that success without recognition is still success, but recognition without authenticity is worthless. For 10 years, I hid my achievements from people who would have celebrated them for the wrong reasons. Now I share them with people who appreciate them for the right ones. The phone rings, interrupting my thoughts. Marcus, my foundation's first loan recipient, calling with an update on his property maintenance business. Ms. Chen, I wanted you to be the first to know. I just signed a contract to manage maintenance for a 12-unit building in the South Bronx. It's my biggest account yet. That's fantastic, Marcus. How did you get the contract? The owner saw the work I did on the building where I live. Turns out, when you care about the quality of your work, instead of just getting through the day, people notice. I smile, remembering Jake's comment about being the most hands-on owner he'd ever worked with. Success isn't just about building wealth, it's about building something worth being proud of. Keep me posted on how it goes, I tell Marcus. And Marcus? Don't let anyone tell you that maintenance work isn't a real career. Some of us have built empires one broken pipe at a time. After I hang up, I pour myself a cup of coffee and walk out to my terrace, looking across the Hudson River toward Manhattan. Somewhere in that skyline are buildings owned by people who inherited their wealth, people who leveraged family connections into business opportunities, people who followed traditional paths to traditional success. And then there are people like me, people who found different ways to build something lasting, people who proved that success doesn't always look the way other people expect it to look. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting back at people. It's becoming so successful that their opinions simply stop mattering. Know your worth, protect your peace, and never let anyone make you feel small for their comfort. Because the people who truly see you will recognize your value regardless of how much money you have. And the people who only see your value after discovering your wealth were never really seeing you at all. If you enjoyed this story of hidden success and family dynamics, make sure to subscribe for more real-life tales of people who proved everyone wrong. Have your own story of unexpected success? Share it in the comments below. You never know who might need to hear that their unconventional path could lead to extraordinary outcomes.